Jake Morrison stood at the window of his small transport ship and watched the massive Zephyrian vessel grow larger as they approached. The alien ship was 3 times the size of any human battleship he had ever seen. Its dark metal surface gleamed, with strange lights that pulsed in patterns he could not understand. This was his first time meeting the Zephyrians, and he felt nervous but tried not to show it. The transport docked with a soft bump, and Jake gathered his papers. He wore his best diplomatic uniform with all the proper medals and badges. The Earth Federation had sent him because he was good at talking to different alien races. He had helped make peace deals with the Altarians and the crystal beings from Vega Prime, but the Zephyrians were different. They were older and stronger than humans, and they knew it. The airlock opened with a hiss and Jake stepped into the alien ship. The first thing he noticed was how tall everything was. The ceilings were twice as high as on human ships. The walls were covered with metal panels that showed moving pictures of alien words he could not read. The air smelled like copper and something sweet that made his nose tingle. 3 Zephyrians waited for him in the corridor. They looked like walking lizards but stood upright like humans. Their skin was dark green with golden patches that sparkled under the lights. They were all taller than Jake by at least 2 feet. The middle one wore a uniform with many silver decorations. This was Admiral Kethver, who Jake had talked to over video calls before coming here. Admiral Kethver bowed his head slightly, which was the Zephyrian way of showing respect. Jake bowed back the same way. The Admiral spoke in perfect English, though his voice sounded like gravel in a metal cup. "Welcome, Captain Morrison. I am glad you have come to discuss peace between our peoples. Let me present my daughter Zareth, who will help you understand our ways during your stay." The female Zephyrian next to the Admiral was younger and smaller, but still taller than Jake. Her golden patches were brighter and formed patterns that looked almost like jewelry on her arms and neck. She wore a uniform that was more decorated than the others. Her eyes were large and yellow with black vertical slits like a cat. When she looked at Jake, those eyes seemed full of disgust. "So this is what humans look like up close," Zareth said, in a voice that sounded bored. "Much smaller than I expected. And that pale skin looks so weak and soft. Do all your kind look this fragile?" Jake felt his face get hot but kept his voice calm. "We may look different, but humans are stronger than we appear. I look forward to learning about your culture during my visit." Zareth made a sound that might have been laughing, but it sounded more like a snake hissing. "Culture? You mean you actually have one? I thought humans were too young as a species to develop real civilization. How long have you been flying between stars?" "A few hundred years. We have been exploring space for over 10,000 years. Admiral Kethver looked uncomfortable and spoke quickly. "Come, Captain Morrison. Let us show you to your quarters so you can rest before tonight's welcome ceremony. The talks will begin tomorrow." They walked through long corridors filled with Zephyrian crew members who stopped their work to stare at Jake. He heard them whisper to each other in their own language. Some sounded curious, but others seemed to be laughing. Zareth walked beside him and continued making comments. "I heard humans only live for about 80 of your years. How do you learn anything useful in such a short time? Our people live for over 300 years. I'm only 40 years old, and I already know more about science and war than your oldest generals." "Living longer does not always make someone wiser," Jake replied carefully. "Sometimes fresh ideas come from new perspectives." "Fresh ideas?" Zareth stopped walking and turned to face him. "What fresh ideas could a primitive species like yours possibly have? You still use chemical rockets for most of your space travel. You fight wars with metal bullets instead of energy weapons. Your computers are so slow they need room-sized buildings to do what our hand devices can do." Other Zephyrians in the corridor had stopped to listen. Jake realized this was becoming a public challenge to his entire species. He needed to be diplomatic, but also could not let humanity look weak. "It is true that our technology is different from yours, but humans have achieved much in our short time among the stars. We have made friends with many species. We have explored dangerous parts of space that others avoid. We have survived wars and disasters that would destroy other civilizations. Zareth made that hissing laugh again. Survived? You mean you have been lucky? Any real challenge would crush your fragile little species like insects? You cannot even breathe the air on most worlds without your mechanical suits. Admiral Kethver stepped between them. Zareth H., that is enough. Captain Morrison is our guest, and should be treated with respect. Respect must be earned, Father. This human and his kind have done nothing to earn mine. She looked directly at Jake with those yellow cat eyes. Perhaps during his stay he can prove that humans are more than the weak creatures they appear to be. Jake extended his hand toward her in the human gesture of friendship. I would be happy to show you what humans can do. We believe actions speak louder than words. Zareth looked at his extended hand like it was something disgusting. She stepped back and spoke loud enough for everyone in the corridor to hear. You want me to touch your diseased flesh? Humans carry bacteria and viruses that could kill other species. Your kind spreads infection wherever you go like walking plague ships. Keep your primitive customs to yourself. The corridor became very quiet. Jake slowly lowered his hand but kept his expression calm. He had been insulted in front of dozens of Zephyrians, and he knew word would spread quickly through both fleets. This was exactly the kind of incident that could ruin the peace talks before they even started. Admiral Kethver looked ashamed of his daughter, but could not directly contradict her in public without losing face according to their customs. Jake understood alien politics well enough to know that pushing back now would only make things worse. I understand cultural differences take time to bridge, Jake said in a steady voice. I hope during my stay we can learn to understand each other. Better, Zareth smiled, showing sharp white teeth. Oh, I am sure this will be very educational for both of us, Captain Morrison. Very educational indeed. The welcome dinner took place in the largest room on the Zephyrian ship. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see the top even when he craned his neck back. Strange blue lights floated in the air without any visible support casting dancing shadows on the walls. Long tables were arranged in a rectangle with the most important guests seated at the head table. Jake sat between Admiral Kethver and an older Zephyrian scientist named Dr. Veltar, who spoke in whispers and seemed nervous about everything. Across from them sat Zareth and several other young Zephyrian officers who kept staring at Jake like he was some kind of unusual animal in a zoo. The food was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The Zephyrians ate what looked like large insects, cooked in colorful sauces and fruits that glowed softly from the inside. They had prepared some human food for Jake, but it was clear they found his dietary needs strange and limiting. So, Captain Morrison, Zareth said loud enough for others to hear, tell us about human achievements. What great things has your species accomplished that we should know about? Jake swallowed a bite of something that tasted like chicken mixed with mint. We have created art and music that expresses the deepest parts of the human experience. We have explored our entire planet and learned to live in every environment from frozen poles to burning deserts. We have developed medicine that has eliminated diseases that once killed millions of our people. Art and music, Zareth repeated with that hissing laugh. How charming. Do you mean like this? She touched a device on her wrist, and suddenly, the room filled with sounds that were clearly Zephyrian music. It was complex and mathematical with layers of harmony that human ears could barely follow. This composition contains over 4,000 individual notes played in perfect synchronization. It was composed by our greatest artist when he was only 15 years old. What can human art compare to this? Jake listened carefully to the alien music. It was impressive, but it left him feeling cold. Your music is very skillful. Human music might be simpler, but it comes from the heart. It makes people feel joy or sadness or hope. We do not create art just to show how clever we are, but to connect with each other. Several Zephyrians at the table made sounds that might have been disapproval. Dr. Veltar whispered something to Admiral Kethver, who nodded slowly. Zareth H. was not finished. What about your science and technology? You mentioned medicine. Our doctors can regrow entire limbs and organs. We can cure any disease and we live 3 times longer than humans. What medical miracles can your primitive healers perform? We may not live as long as Zephyrians, but we make every year count. Human doctors work with limited resources and still save lives every day. We have learned to replace hearts and other organs. We have vaccines that prevent diseases before they start. We do not just heal individual bodies, but we study how to keep entire populations healthy. Vaccines, Zareth said the word like it tasted bad. You mean you deliberately infect yourselves with weakened diseases? How barbaric. Zephyrian medicine is far beyond such crude methods. Jake was beginning to feel angry, but he kept his voice level. Sometimes the crude method that works is better than the elegant method that fails. Humans have learned to be practical. Zareth leaned forward with those yellow eyes gleaming. Practical? Yes, that is a good word for your species. You are practical because you have no choice. You do not have our strength or our intelligence or our technology, so you must make do with less. You are like creatures that live in caves and claim the darkness is better than sunlight. The room had grown quiet as other Zephyrians stopped their own conversations to listen. Jake realized this had become a public challenge, not just to him but to all of humanity. Admiral Kethver looked troubled but bound by his culture's rules about honor and family dignity. If you believe humans are so weak and primitive, Jake said carefully, perhaps you would be willing to prove it? Zareth's eyes widened slightly. Prove it? What do you mean human? I mean a test. A competition? You seem very confident that Zephyrians are superior to humans in every way. If that is true, then you should have no trouble demonstrating it. What kind of test? Admiral Kethver asked with concern in his voice. Jake thought quickly. He needed to turn this situation around, but without creating a diplomatic incident. Let Zareth choose the challenges. Physical strength, mental ability, any test she thinks will prove Zephyrian's superiority. If she wins, then I will publicly acknowledge that humans are inferior and should accept a junior position in any alliance between our peoples. Zareth sat up straighter, looking interested. And if you somehow manage not to fail completely? Then you spend 24 hours living like a human. No Zephyrian technology, no genetic advantages, no special privileges. You experience what life is really like for someone from my species. That is ridiculous. Why would I want to limit myself to human weaknesses? Jake smiled. To prove that Zephyrian superiority is real and not just an accident of biology. If your people are truly better than humans, then you should be able to function just as well under human limitations. Unless you are afraid the test might be too difficult? The challenge in Jake's voice was unmistakable. Around the table, Zephyrian officers leaned forward with interest. This was exactly the kind of honor-bound contest their culture respected. Zareth could not back down now without looking cowardly in front of her peers and her father. Afraid? Zareth's voice rose. I am not afraid of anything, especially not pretending to be a weak human for one day. Very well, Captain Morrison. I accept your challenge. But we do this properly with witnesses and formal rules. Admiral Kethver stood up looking unhappy. Zrt, perhaps you should consider ... No, father. This human thinks his species deserves respect. Let him prove it, or let him admit publicly that humans should know their place in the galaxy. Dr. Veltar whispered something urgent to the Admiral, but Zareth was already speaking again. 3 tests, Captain Morrison. First, physical ability. Then mental capacity. Finally, technological achievement. When you fail all 3, you will broadcast a message to your fleet acknowledging human inferiority. And when I succeed? Jake asked. You will not succeed. But if somehow you do not completely embarrass yourself, then I will spend 1 day living under human limitations. Though I cannot imagine what I might learn from such a pointless exercise. Jake extended his hand again, but this time not in friendship. Then we have an agreement. This time Zareth did not step back. She looked at his hand for a long moment, then reached out with her own. Her fingers were longer than human fingers, with small claws at the tips. Her skin felt warm and dry like leather. When they shook hands, her grip was much stronger than his, but Jake did not flinch. "We have an agreement, human. Prepare to learn the difference between confidence and foolishness." Around the table, other Zephyrians began talking excitedly about the upcoming contest. Word would spread through the ship within hours. Jake had committed himself and his species to a very public test. If he failed, it could damage human reputation for years to come, but as he looked at Zareth's smug expression, he felt more determined than worried. She had made one crucial mistake. She assumed that being physically weaker meant being inferior. In every way. Jake had spent his entire career proving that assumption wrong. Tomorrow she would learn what humans could really do, when they stopped trying to match other species and started playing to their own strengths. The next morning, Jake woke early and did his usual exercise routine in his small quarters. Push-ups, sit-ups, and stretches that kept his human body flexible and strong. He had learned long ago that humans could not match alien species in raw power, but they had other advantages that most aliens never thought about. The contest was set to take place in the ship's main cargo bay, which had been cleared of equipment, and set up like an arena. Word had spread through both fleets, and Jake could see alien faces pressed against viewing windows high above. Even some humans from his escort ships had been allowed to watch. Zareth arrived wearing a form-fitting outfit that showed her muscular, reptilian body. She looked confident and relaxed, like this would be easy entertainment. Admiral Kethver and Dr. Veltar stood with a group of other senior Zephyrian officers who would judge the contests. "Are you ready to begin your education, human?" Zareth asked with that sharp-toothed smile. "I am ready," Jake replied simply. The first test was physical ability. Zareth had set up a series of challenges that seemed designed to showcase Zephyrian advantages. Heavy weights to lift, walls to climb, and obstacles that required pure strength to overcome. "Begin with the lifting contest," she announced, pointing to a bar loaded with metal plates. "This weighs 400 pounds in your measurement system. I will lift it first to show you the standard." Zareth approached the weight bar and grasped it with both hands. Her muscles tensed, and she lifted the enormous weight over her head with what looked like moderate effort. She held it there for several seconds, then lowered it back to the floor with perfect control. The watching Zephyrians made approving sounds. "Your turn, Captain Morrison. Unless you wish to concede this test now and save yourself the embarrassment." Jake walked over to the weight bar and examined it carefully. 400 pounds was more than twice what he could lift under normal circumstances. But he had not become a successful diplomat by giving up when faced with impossible situations. Instead of trying to lift the bar, the same way Zareth had done, Jake began moving the weight plates around. He repositioned them and used the bar like a lever with one of the metal support posts as a fulcrum point. By applying force at the right angle, he was able to lift the same 400 pounds with much less effort. "What are you doing?" Zareth demanded. "That is not how the test works. You said I needed to lift the weight. You did not say I had to do it the same way you did." Jake adjusted his lever system and raised the weight even higher than Zareth had managed. Humans learned long ago that tools and techniques can overcome raw strength. Some of the watching Zephyrians began talking among themselves. Admiral Kethver looked thoughtful. Dr. Veltar was taking notes on a small device. The climbing test came next. Zareth scaled a smooth 20-foot wall using only her claws and muscle power. She made it look effortless, reaching the top in less than 30 seconds. Jake studied the wall and the cargo bay around it. Instead of trying to climb straight up, he found loose cable and rigging equipment that he fashioned into a simple pulley system. Using his own body weight as a counterbalance, he pulled himself up the wall in a series of controlled movements. It took him longer than Zareth, but he reached the top without the physical strain she had endured. "This is cheating," Zareth protested. "This is thinking," Jake replied. "Humans do not just use their muscles. We use our minds to find better ways to solve problems." The obstacle course was the final physical test. It required jumping across gaps, crawling under barriers, and navigating through tight spaces. Zareth completed it with raw athletic ability. Powering through each challenge with strength and speed, Jake took a different approach. He studied the entire course layout, first looking for patterns and shortcuts. Instead of jumping across the widest part of each gap, he found angles that made the distances shorter. Instead of forcing his way under barriers, he moved them slightly to create easier passages. Instead of following the obvious path, he found a route that avoided the most difficult obstacles entirely. When he finished the course, his time was actually better than Zareth's, even though he had moved more carefully. The Zephyrian audience was no longer making dismissive sounds. They were watching with real interest. "The second test is mental ability," Zareth announced, but she sounded less confident than before. She produced a device that projected complex mathematical problems into the air as glowing symbols. These were calculations that required understanding of advanced physics and multidimensional geometry. Zareth solved them quickly using what Jake realized was some kind of neural interface that connected her brain directly to a computer system. "Your people cannot even interface with our technology directly," she said as she completed problem after problem. "How can you possibly match Zephyrian mental capacity?" Jake looked at the floating equations and symbols. Many of them were beyond human mathematics, but some followed patterns he recognized. Instead of trying to solve each problem the way it was presented, he looked for underlying relationships and shortcuts. "This equation here," he pointed to one of the floating displays. "It is asking for the volume of a 7-dimensional geometric shape, but if you rotate it through these dimensions and collapse these variables, it becomes a simple cube calculation." He worked through the problem using intuition and pattern recognition rather than formal mathematics. His approach was messy and would have made Zephyrian mathematicians cringe, but it worked. He found correct answers by thinking about problems from angles that rigid mathematical training had not considered. For the final mental test, Zareth presented a strategic simulation. It showed a space battle with dozens of ships maneuvering in complex patterns. She had to make decisions about formations, weapon timing, and resource allocation while managing multiple variables simultaneously. Zara single quotes approached it like a chess master calculating dozens of moves ahead. Her Zephyrian mind could track more details than any human, but Jake noticed something she had missed. The simulation was not just about tactical perfection. It was about unpredictability. When his turn came, Jake made decisions that seemed random or even counterproductive. He split his forces when he should have concentrated them. He attacked positions that seemed unimportant while avoiding obvious targets. His fleet movements looked chaotic compared to Zareth's precise formations, but chaos was exactly what the simulation had not been programmed to handle. Jake's unpredictable tactics confused the enemy artificial intelligence and created opportunities that careful planning could never have achieved. His final score was lower in technical categories but higher in overall effectiveness. "The final test is technological achievement," Zareth said, but now she sounded worried. She displayed examples of Zephyrian engineering, faster than light engines, that could cross the galaxy in weeks, weapons that could destroy entire planets, cities that floated in space without any visible support systems. All of it was far beyond anything humans had ever built. "What can your primitive technology offer to compare with this?" she demanded. Jake thought for a moment, then began to speak. "Zephyrian technology is impressive, but it requires vast resources and centuries of development. Humans achieve our goals with simpler tools and less time. We built our first starship with chemical rockets and metal plates. We reached other worlds using computers less powerful than Zephyrian toys. We made contact with alien species using radio signals and mathematics." He paused and looked directly at Zareth. "Most importantly, we did all of this while our people were still fighting wars among ourselves. We achieved space travel not because we were unified like Zephyrians, but because we were desperate to find something better. Human technology comes from the need to overcome impossible odds with limited resources." "That proves nothing," Zareth said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It proves that humans do not give up. Ever. When we face problems we cannot solve with strength, we use intelligence. When intelligence is not enough, we use creativity. When creativity fails, we use determination. We keep trying new approaches until something works. Around the cargo bay, the Zephyrian audience was completely silent. Admiral Keffer stepped forward to address them both. This contest has been most educational. Captain Morrison, you have shown that human capabilities are different from what we expected. Zareth, you must now fulfill your part of the agreement. Zareth looked around at all the watching faces. She had been confident this morning that she would easily prove Zephyrian superiority. Instead, she had learned that humans were far more resourceful and adaptable than anyone had imagined. Very well, she said quietly. I will spend one day living under human limitations, though I still do not understand what this will prove about anything. The space station New Horizon was a massive structure that served as neutral ground between different species. It had sections designed for humans, Zephyrians, and dozens of other alien races. Jake led Zareth to the human quarter where she would spend the next 24 hours living by human rules and limitations. First, we need to disable your genetic advantages, Jake explained as they entered a medical facility. Humans do not have enhanced strength or speed or built-in computers in their brains. You will need to function with only what a normal human body can do. Dr. Patricia Brooks was the human doctor who ran the medical facility. She was a small woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent most of her career treating injured traders and miners. When Jake explained what they needed, she looked skeptical. You want me to temporarily suppress her biological enhancements? That could be dangerous. Zephyrians depend on those systems for basic functions. I can handle whatever weakness you impose. On me, Zareth said impatiently. Human limitations cannot be that severe. Dr. Brooks prepared a series of injections that would block Zareth's enhanced reflexes and reduce her strength to human levels. She also attached a device to Zareth's head that would prevent her from accessing computer networks through her neural interface. This will feel very strange, Dr. Brooks warned. Most aliens who try this experience disorientation and fatigue. Are you sure you want to do this? Proceed, Zareth said confidently. The injections took effect within minutes. Zareth immediately stumbled and had to grab a wall for support. Her enhanced balance and coordination were gone. When she tried to lift a simple metal chair, she found it much heavier than expected. This is temporary, she said, but Jake could hear uncertainty in her voice. Everything humans deal with is temporary, Jake replied. That is part of what makes it challenging. Their first stop was the human residential section where families lived in small apartments while working on the station. Jake had arranged for Zareth to stay with the Martinez family, who ran a small restaurant in the commercial district. Carlos Martinez was a big man with friendly eyes who welcomed Zareth like she was a distant relative visiting for the first time. His wife Rosa was busy preparing food for the lunch crowd, but she smiled and showed Zareth to a tiny room with a narrow bed and a small window, looking out at the stars. Not much compared to what you are used to, I bet, Carlos said cheerfully. But it is clean and the bed is comfortable. Rosa will have breakfast ready in an hour if you want to help in the kitchen. Zareth looked around the cramped room with obvious distaste. On Zephyrian ships, even junior officers had quarters twice this size with private facilities and advanced entertainment systems. This felt like living in a storage closet. When breakfast time came, Zareth discovered that helping in a human kitchen was much more difficult than she had expected. Without her enhanced reflexes, she kept dropping things and bumping into walls. The simple task of carrying plates from the kitchen to tables left her feeling clumsy and frustrated. Takes practice, Rosa said kindly when Zareth spilled coffee on a customer. My Carlos broke more dishes in his first week here than we sold food. You will get the hang of it. But Zareth was not getting the hang of it. Every task that should have been easy became a struggle. Opening containers with her reduced strength. Reading human writing without computer assistance to translate it instantly. Even walking felt different when she could not rely on her enhanced balance. By midday, she was exhausted in a way she had never experienced before. Zephyrians were built to function efficiently for long periods without fatigue. But in her weakened state, she found herself breathing hard and sweating after just a few hours of light work. "This is ridiculous," she complained to Jake when he came to check on her progress. "How do humans accomplish anything when they are limited by such weak bodies? We rest when we need to, and we work together to compensate for individual weaknesses," Jake explained. "Watch how the Martinez family operates their restaurant." Zareth began to pay attention to the human family dynamics. Carlos was strong and handled the heavy lifting and food preparation. Rosa was organized and managed the customers and money. Their teenage daughter helped translate for alien customers who spoke different languages. Each person contributed what they did best and covered for what others could not do as well. In Zephyrian society, individuals are expected to excel in all areas, Zareth observed. We compete with each other to prove superiority. Humans learn that cooperation often works better than competition. We achieve more by helping each other than by trying to do everything alone. The afternoon brought new challenges. Jake took Zareth to the station's repair bay where human engineers were working on a damaged freight ship. The lead engineer was a woman named Betty Chun who had been fixing starships for 20 years. "We need an extra pair of hands," Betty explained. "The ship's environmental system is failing, and we have to replace the air recycling units before the crew runs out of breathable atmosphere." Without her technological interfaces, Zareth could not instantly analyze the ship's technical specifications or access repair databases. She had to rely on Betty's verbal instructions and her own observation to understand how the systems worked. "Hand me that wrench," Betty called from inside the ship's cramped service tunnel. The big one with the adjustable head. Zareth looked at the collection of human tools with confusion. On Zephyrian ships, all equipment was controlled through mental commands. These primitive mechanical devices required her to figure out their purpose through trial and error. She grabbed what she thought was the right wrench, but it was too small. Then she chose one that was too large. Betty had to crawl out of the tunnel and show her which tool was needed and how to use it properly. "Never worked with your hands before?" Betty asked without judgment. "Lots of folks from high-tech species have trouble with manual tools at first. The trick is to think about what the job needs and then find the tool that matches." This was a completely new way of thinking for Zareth. Instead of having perfect information available instantly, she had to observe and experiment and learn through mistakes. It was inefficient and frustrating, but gradually she began to understand the logic behind human tool use. The repair work took 6 hours of steady effort. By the end, Zareth's hands were dirty and sore from gripping unfamiliar tools. Her back ached from crawling through tight spaces. Her head hurt from concentrating without computer assistance. But the air recycling system was working, and the freight crew would survive their journey home. "Good work today," Betty said as they finished. "You have potential as a mechanic if you ever want a career change." Zareth was too tired to respond. With her usual sarcasm, she had never experienced physical exhaustion like this before. Her enhanced Zephyrian body would have completed this work without strain, but she was discovering that human limitations forced different approaches to problem-solving. Evening brought the final challenge. Jake took her to the station's recreation area where humans gathered after work to socialize and relax. Without her technological advantages, Zareth had to navigate human social customs through observation and conversation rather than accessing databases about proper behavior. A group of traders invited her to join their card game. The rules were simple, but the strategy required reading human facial expressions and body language to guess what cards other players were holding. Zephyrians communicated more directly, and Zareth found it difficult to interpret the subtle signals humans used. "You are trying too hard," one of the traders advised. "Card playing is supposed to be fun, not work. Just enjoy the company and let the game happen." This concept was foreign to Zareth, who had been trained to approach every activity as a competition to be won. But as the evening progressed, she began to understand what the humans meant. They were not just playing cards, but sharing stories and jokes and complaints about their work. The game was an excuse for social bonding rather than a test of superiority. By the time she returned to her small room, Zareth could barely stand upright. Every muscle in her body ached. Her head was pounding from the effort of thinking without computer assistance. She collapsed onto the narrow bed and tried to process what she had experienced. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be limited by biology rather than enhanced by it. Humans lived every day with weaknesses that would cripple a Zephyrian. Yet somehow they not only survived, but thrived by finding ways to work around their limitations rather than being defeated by them. She thought about Jake's performance in the contests. He had not tried to match Zephyrian abilities, but had found completely different approaches to the same problems. This was not weakness or primitive thinking. It was a different kind of intelligence adapted to working with constraints rather than advantages. As exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep, Zareth realized that her understanding of strength and weakness had been completely wrong. Humans were not inferior because they had limitations. They were remarkable because they succeeded despite having limitations that would stop most other species from even trying. Zareth woke up feeling like she had been hit by a cargo transport. Every part of her body hurt in ways she had never experienced before. Her muscles ached from the unfamiliar strain of manual labor. Her head throbbed from thinking without computer assistance. Even her feet were sore from walking without enhanced balance systems. She tried to sit up in the narrow bed, but immediately felt dizzy and had to lie back down. This was what humans called exhaustion, and it was far worse than anything she had imagined. How did they function when their bodies betrayed them like this every single day? A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Rosa Martinez entered carrying a tray with breakfast and something that smelled like coffee. "Good morning, dear. Jake told me you might need some recovery time after yesterday. I brought food and something for the headache." Rosa helped Zareth sit up slowly and handed her a cup of warm liquid that tasted bitter, but somehow made her feel slightly better. The food was simple but filling, and gradually her strength began to return. "Is this normal for